There is a minority report. There is a minority report on this bill. The chair recognizes to speak to the minority report Representative Holcomb. Representative Holcomb, under the rules of the House, you have 20 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in opposition to House Bill 512. In doing so, I speak in support of the Second Amendment to the U.S. Constitution. The right to bear arms is enshrined in the Bill of Rights. It is an important part of our sense of freedom. It embodies a part of the American spirit. We are a free, independent, and self-reliant people. The right to own a gun is appropriate and important, and it is a right that must be respected. But it is long established policy in this country that there are reasonable limitations of time and place, and a recognition that property owners can have a say in whether or not weapons are allowed. The Georgia Constitution, for those who believe in state rights, states that the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed, but the General Assembly shall have the power to prescribe the manner in which arms may be borne. I want you to know that I understand the argument offered by those who support the bill. I agree with the notion that there is a deterrence aspect to some of the provisions of this law. I also know that there are those who sincerely worry about their safety and want firearms not to harm others, but to protect themselves. I get that. I also believe that proponents of this bill sincerely believe that passing this bill will lead to fewer deaths. I have a different view, and I'm not alone. There is no absolute, no kidding, right answer on gun policy. The truth is, we have no way of knowing if more lives will be lost or saved if we pass this. That's the truth. And for each story we hear evidencing why this policy is exactly the right fix, we can hear an opposing story on why that's just not true. There are cases where licensed, law-abiding citizens became murderers. It's also important to mention that there is no data, none, to support the argument that the cure for gun violence is more guns. Let me share with you a couple of stories from my own experience that have helped shape my own views. I have considerable experience with firearms. First, I served for 12 years in the armed forces. I enlisted at age 18, and I deployed 3 times. 10 years ago today, in 2003, I was in Kuwait waiting for the invasion of Iraq to begin. One of the darkest days of the war was March 23rd. The Fedayeen were attacking our forces as we made our way to Baghdad, and while that was happening, an American soldier killed 2 American officers. I tell you that because at that time, everyone had a firearm. Everyone. And that didn't prevent a tragedy. In other words, at that moment in our history, arming everyone didn't save lives. I also used to be a prosecutor. My very first case was a suicide that, after investigation, turned out to be a homicide. The tragedy occurred in a Savannah apartment outside of Hunter Army Airfield on a Saturday night. The roommates were drinking heavily and they got into a verbal argument. The victim died from a single gunshot wound to the head. And it happened because they were both drunk and because of the presence of a firearm. And that's what worries me about expanding guns onto college campuses. I'm not, by nature, a worrier, but I worry that the mix of alcohol, drugs, sex, and immaturity on college campuses could be fatal. And as I said before, I'm not alone in holding this belief. I listened to all of the testimony offered regarding this bill. Advocates for the bill spoke in favor of a strong Second Amendment and for the full exercise of their constitutional rights. And I respect those views. Many students spoke against this bill, and I respect their views. But the views that I found most compelling were those from Chancellor Huckabee, the leaders of our colleges, universities, and technical schools, as well as law enforcement personnel. To a person, they opposed this bill. To a person, and these are the professionals charged with protecting students on college campuses throughout our state, they spoke in very practical terms about their concerns for the safety and security of their charges. They worry that a proliferation of guns on campus might increase, not reduce, the risk of violence and harm. I take that testimony very seriously. I believe that their well-reasoned and honestly expressed concerns should matter enormously when weighing the consequences of this bill. I especially value the views and opinions of Chancellor Huckabee. If you had not had a chance to read his testimony, you should. As the law stands today, the Second Amendment is not absolute. The Second Amendment does not mean that guns cannot be regulated. That's simply not true. The federal government and the states have the power to impose regulations for the sake of public safety and the preservation of order. We strive to pass measures that will make us safer. In fact, this bill itself recognizes that the Second Amendment rights are not unlimited. Look at lines 222 to 223. It says we should keep guns away from athletic sporting events and student housing to include fraternity and sorority houses, explicitly recognizing the risk that guns pose in those settings. Let me prove my point a little further. We don't allow guns in the Capitol. So what we're prepared to do here is declare, over the objection of the Chancellor and of all the college, university, technical presidents, that we think y'all are wrong, and guns in classrooms are a great idea, but we're not going to allow them here in this building. The authors of this bill made an arbitrary decision to listen to those who said guns in certain settings were dangerous, sporting events and frat houses, but they tuned out when experts said guns in classrooms or dining halls were also unsafe. This isn't logical and can't be justified. Consequently, I oppose this bill because of the expansion of weapons on college campuses. Now, I also want to talk about arming local administrators, which is the section of the bill that used to be House Bill 35. I understand the intent behind the bill, and I know that it is well-intentioned. After the bill passed committee, I reached out to all of the principals in my district, every single one. To a person, they all said that they don't want this. They all said that they want resource officers, not armed administrators. I also spoke with one of the state's experts who has decades of experience on school safety. I told him about the bill and how I thought that it had some merit in terms of the deterrence argument. He told me without hesitation, and I was actually surprised by this, that he opposed the bill. He worried that if he were the person authorized to carry and had to break up a fight, the weapon could get loose and a fatality could occur, and he had experience with doing that. He also said, and I didn't know this before, that weapons are frequently forgotten and left behind. He also told me that we would not have to, or he would not want to have to terminate someone who would be carrying. That's something that I heard from all the principals in my district. It's a real concern and one that I think that we need to take seriously. I know that others may disagree with these views, but I take seriously the views of experts. And I don't view our students as prey. I see them as students. With respect to how we can best protect the public, which is our overall goal, I think we can do better. We have to do better treating those with mental illness. As you may recall, Chief Justice Hunstein said that mental health treatment is almost unavailable except if there is a threat of suicide or homicide. I'd like us to do better addressing that. And finally, I want to talk about suicide. At the end of last year, I started learning about the suicide numbers for our service members and veterans. In 2012, in the Army alone, there were 325 suicides. That's almost one a day, and it's a national crisis. And the presence of a firearm was a major factor in those numbers. Why do I raise that? I started looking a little more into the issue of suicide and a little more broadly, and what I learned is that suicide is sadly also a major issue for our college population. And that's why I have concerns about expanding access to firearms onto college campuses. This bill recognizes that, and that's why it says not to have weapons in all places at all times. And the real bottom line is this: we don't have a crystal ball on this. If the proponents of this bill could guarantee that this would save lives, you'd have my vote. Likewise, I concede that I can't guarantee that my position will save more lives. We just don't know. And so what we're left with is our best judgment about where to draw the lines on when and where guns will be permitted. We're not erasing the lines. Make no mistake about that. We're redrawing them. I think it's safer to keep the lines where they are and keep guns off campus, and that's why I'm voting no. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I yield the well.
You have questions if you care to take them.
I'll take one.
Chair recognizes Representative Morgan to your left for a question.
Does the gentleman yield?
Yes.
I just have a couple of questions. The first one is, because I didn't get a chance to ask the author or the other presenters in favor of the bill, do you have a sense of what the process will be in schools for parents to be involved in a conversation regarding allowing an administrator to carry a gun on campus?
My understanding is that they will be involved in the conversation, but if it is authorized, parents will not know who will be carrying weapons in the schools, as that will be kept secret, that will be kept confidential, and it will be excluded from the state's Open Records Act laws.
And then secondly, while I respect my colleagues who have spoken today, I have to say I was offended by a comment that was made. And so my question is, do you think that the parents of Sandy Hook Elementary would agree that someone with a bat would be as dangerous as a person who tragically murdered those children?
I think we all know what the answer to that is.
Thank you.
Mr. Speaker, I yield the well.
Gentleman has yielded the well.